Drew Abernathy and his wife Hannah have arrived to Drew's family home, along with his older twin siblings, Madeline and Charles Abernathy Jr., and their youngest sibling, Cammie Abernathy. Cammie is a social media content creator. Madeline runs the family company's tech investments and entertainment divisions. Charles Jr. aka CJ runs the company's hotels and news channels. Meanwhile, Drew and Hannah run the family's charities. When they go inside the house, they see their dad's right-hand man Miles, and ask him where everyone else is, and Miles tells them that their dad asked the entire staff to leave for the night, and they ask why, and Miles says that their dad will explain everything to them. When they go into their dad's office, Charles Abernathy Sr. asks Drew why he brought Hannah with him because the invite said that only his kids were to be here. But Hannah says that she wasn't going to miss his birthday. Charles tells them that he invited them here because he's going to die, and all of them start freaking out because he doesn't visibly look sick, but he says that he never stated he was ill. He then goes on to say that there's a price on his head. Hannah then asks him why on earth would he tell all his security to go home if he knows he's being hunted down, and he says it's because the only people he truly trusts are his own flesh and blood, so he can't risk the killer being one of his staff. To show his kids how serious this is, he reads them his updated will that states that if he dies before midnight, none of his kids will be inheriting anything from him, so they have no choice but to protect him unless they'd like to let their current lifestyle go. Miles tells him that all external communications has been suspended, all entrances and exits have been locked, and all windows have been replaced with bulletproof glass. Charles tells Hannah that she really doesn't have to stay, and she should leave with Miles, but she says she wouldn't be able to forgive herself if anything happened to him. When Miles leaves the Abernathy mansion, there's a series of locks that all lock simultaneously. The twins call a family meeting, where they both refuse to believe that there's someone out to get their dad, and truly believe that he made it all up just to have them back together under one roof, as it's been 2 years since they've all been together. Hannah tells them what if there's a chance that Charles isn't lying, and something is really out to get him, so then they come up with the idea to look around the house for anything suspicious. Hannah sees a room way down the hall, that all the kids don't even set foot in there because it creeps them all out, because it's their father's room filled with his insane obsession with mythology, that he would constantly be inside while skipping their birthdays and any important events regarding his children. The twins start fighting with Cammie because they think this whole thing is ridiculous, and they could have been somewhere more important actually working, and call out that Cammie's social media career isn't a real job and she shouldn't be comparing her struggles to theirs. Cammie goes down to the wine cellar to get 2 Rothschild's wine. Then the door to the wine cellar closes suddenly. Then she starts hearing weird eerie sounds, and also starts hearing scratching and movements against the wine barrels. When she runs up the stairs, she starts abruptly knocking on the door asking for someone to open it for her. While she's knocking, there's a weird shadow down the cellar that appears to be getting closer to her, but luckily, someone opens the door for her. And we see that it was CJ who locked her down the cellar, because apparently she used to love being locked down there, and he wanted to relive old childhood memories. Drew and Hannah go and ask Charles why he thinks someone's after him, but he says that he believes it's not someone, but it's something that's after him like a spirit because he made a deal that cost someone their life. While playing pool alone, CJ's drink mysteriously falls without anyone pushing it over. When he goes to inspect how his drink just suddenly fell, he returns over to the pool table, and it's suddenly all organized again, like before he started playing, and starts freaking out even more, and then Madeline shows up, and he calms down because he believes that Madeline did it to mess with him. Cammie is in the indoor pool area, taking a video because she can't go live as all internet access has been shut down, and she's telling her audience about her latest swimwear line, and the pre-orders drop the following week. While she's filming, she spots a shadow of a man standing in the background next to a plant and gets spooked out. When she turns to see it with her own eyes, it vanishes and she calls out if anyone's there. She goes over to the plant to look around even more but doesn't find anything, so she calms down and takes off her shoes and places her feet into the pool. When she's watching the video she just took, someone or something gets close to her, and suddenly we're underwater and see her phone get dunked into the pool and her legs start uncontrollably shaking, and she gets moved from one side of the pool to the other and she floats out of the pool and we hear a snapping sound. Then drops of blood start falling into the pool and she's also suddenly dunked full body inside the pool. And it's very visible that she's gone and has a wound opening on her forehead where all the blood is coming from. After years of doing their own thing, the other siblings realize that they haven't seen Cammie in a while, and find her dead inside the pool. They all start freaking out because how could someone have gotten inside the house when it's been secured extensively? Then Drew says that maybe someone had already been inside the house when Miles locked it and they could have been the one to kill Cammie. They tell their dad about Cammie's death. Then Hannah and Drew tell Charles to explain to CJ and Madeline about the deal that he made, and he tells them that if it's not someone coming for him, it's definitely something, and CJ refuses to believe that a spirit or ghost is out to get his dad. Charles then applauds Hannah's bravery for deciding to stay, and he says that she showed him that she's a true Abernathy, and he says he's going to change his will, to say that Cammie's inheritance will now go to Hannah, and just like that Hannah and Drew are now $2 billion richer. The kids decide to lock him in his office, while CJ takes a shotgun to use to protect himself, and Madeline decides that she's going to sleep. They tell him that he shouldn't open the door unless he hears their family knock. When Drew and Hannah go to the pool, they find that Cammy's body has disappeared. Meanwhile, the twins are in Maddie's room when she tells CJ that she was once engaged, but Charles refused for her to marry that man because he wasn't up to Abernathy's standards. And CJ is shocked because he didn't even know she was engaged, and Maddie says of course he didn't because their dad didn't want anyone to know. She further goes on to say that it was different when Drew wanted to marry Hannah, who's also nowhere near Abernathy's standards, but their dad totally allowed it to happen. Then they both say that they were never good enough for their dad, but Drew could do no harm in their dad's eyes. Maddie and CJ say that Hannah is trying to replace them in their dad's life, just like how she replaced Cammy by taking her inheritance as soon as she passed away. CJ tells Madeline that they need to do something to make them disappear before it's them that disappear instead. Meanwhile, Drew and Hannah are trying to find a way out because this whole situation is becoming too real for them, and they end up in that room that all the siblings said they don't set foot in because it's too creepy, and Hannah finally sees the weird things he's been collecting, along with a picture of Blake's temptation of Eve from Paradise Lost, and she says that it should be in a museum. They find an opening, then Drew tells Hannah to try to get through, as she can fit and try to get help. When she gets her head, right arm and upper torso through the door, she tells Drew that she's stuck and he tries helping her out. She starts freaking out and saying that there's something in there. When she gets out, all the statues in the room start to turn on their own and they all face Hannah and Drew. When they try getting out the room, the lights suddenly go out, but they manage to get out. As soon as they're out of the room, they hear Charles doing the family knock. Drew and Hannah are confused as to why he leave his office, as it's the safest place for him. They follow the knock to the family vault, and as soon as they get inside, the door gets closed and they're locked inside with very limited oxygen. We later see that Maddie and CJ tricked Hannah and Drew to get into the vault as a part of their plan to get rid of them. Maddie and CJ see a man's shadow and tell him that they have money and a gun with them so he can come out already. Maddie hears Cammy's voice calling her, and she follows the voice, which is really dumb because Cammy's gone, but yet you still follow her voice. CJ tells her to not go towards the voice. When she gets around the corner, no one is there and Cammy's voice stops completely. Then Maddie turns around facing CJ, and she appears to be unable to move and as if something is slowly strangling her. Then she starts to float and unable to breathe, and softly and asks CJ to help her. But of course CJ does absolutely nothing even though he's looking at his twin sister floating. But I digress because I would have probably been too stunned to do anything either. She then gets dropped to the floor and tries grabbing the gun, but gets dragged across the hall, and only then CJ runs after his sister and picks up the gun to use as protection, and as soon as he turns the corner, Maddie has disappeared entirely. Madeline wakes up in her bedroom, and she sees wet footprints leading to the portrait of Cammy in her room. Then the portrait starts bleeding from its head and Maddie is stunned and confused, and when she touches the blood, it turns out it's very real. When she looks back to the portrait, Cammy's eyes are now facing towards Maddie. Then Cammy's hands reach out to Maddie and she falls on her back. Now Cammy gets out of the portrait looking all creepy and like a corpse. It gets closer and closer to Maddie, while she tries talking to it thinking it's really Cammy, and it stretches its mouth way beyond a human can, and a river of fluid comes out of her mouth all showering Maddie in it. CJ shows up and tells it to get away from Maddie, and it actually listens but instead gets closer and closer to CJ while he tells it he'll shoot. And he eventually does, but it doesn't make a dent. Then seconds later it disappears into thin air, and we actually see that he shot Maddie and not the ghost, meaning the ghost tricked him into seeing Cammy's corpse while it was Maddie. Maddie looks at CJ and just says his name. Then CJ starts crying because he killed his own twin. Moments later he hears sounds and goes out of the room to see if anyone's there, but he doesn't find anything, and when he returns into Maddie's room, her body has also disappeared. While the oxygen in the vault is about to hit zero, CJ comes right in time and unlocks it, and they're very happy and thankful to see him. CJ tells them that Madeline's gone, and he tells them to go ask Charles what type of deal he made that had to cost them their sisters' deaths. CJ tells Hannah and Drew to go and he'll try to fight off this thing. Drew and Hannah run into the library. Then they end up seeing a light under the bookshelf and come to the conclusion that there's another room in there. They pull a lot of books on the bookshelf until Hannah sees Paradise of the Lost, and when she pulls on it, the bookshelf opens up. They find a grimoire, which is basically a book of magical spells written in Latin, and another book on a table, but this one written in an old ancient language that they can't read either. They remove everything on the table and find the table is a ritual sacrifice table thing. Meanwhile, CJ sees the spirit that's in Cammy's body, and it freaks him out that he steps back to get away from it. But he falls down 3 flights of stairs. He suddenly comes to, but like Maddie, he's paralyzed and sees both Cammy and Maddie's bodies looking down on him from the stairs. Maddie comes closer to CJ, and she starts hugging CJ. But the hug isn't a normal hug, and she's actually crushing him to his death and seems like she's sucking the life out of him, because he ends up as an old ragged corpse. Then Drew and Hannah hear him scream, so they run out of his dad's secret room. Hannah and Drew start frantically knocking on Charles's door, ignoring the fact that they have to do the family knock. Thankfully Charles opens, and Hannah and Drew are now fed up and demand answers from Charles, because they saw his secret room. Charles tells them that after years of success in their family, his father started embezzling money and he ruined the family name and lost the family wealth they had acquired over generations. So Charles saw it upon himself to correct his father's wrongs. And so he made a deal with a demon named Mammon, because Drew's mom wanted kids with everything in her. But Charles didn't want them to have kids in the situation they were in. So he made a deal with the demon that cost him his life. He tells them that he agreed with the demon that it would take him on his 75th birthday, aka midnight. But when their mom passed away, he realized that he isn't at all ready to die, so he made another deal with Mammon, that Mammon will take Charles's entire bloodline and he'd be the only Abernathy alive. Then he tells Drew that he was always his favorite, and shoots him in the head. Then Hannah is obviously devastated, but Charles says that she saw him kill his own son, so she must also die. He hunts her down around the whole house, until Hannah grabs CJ's shotgun and he shoots Charles with it, and he hits a standing alarm clock and it falls onto him. Hannah tells him that Mammon is after him, and he says he isn't because he's the last Abernathy. Then Hannah says he isn't, because hers and Drew's daughter is the other Abernathy still living. Mammon shows up at midnight on the dot and eats him alive. The next morning Miles shows up, and Hannah tells him that everyone's gone and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the inheritance. Thanks for watching.